Conservatives are calling for Prime Minister Mark Carney to fire Public Safety Minister Anandasangaree. That's after a conversation between Anandasangaree and his tenant was leaked, in which the minister said he would have a very different approach if he could start the gun buyback program over from scratch. Reporters were on the Hill today to ask Liberal MPs how they felt.
Gary's incredibly loyal. I think he's doing a great job. He believes in the program, so do I.
Look, I have confidence in the Public Safety Minister and the programs that we're rolling out. This is what Canadians asked us to do. They voted for this, and we need to get the programs out.
Look, I'm willing to work with my colleague to make sure that we execute on the campaign commitment when it comes to the gun buyback.
Good morning. The Public Safety Minister's leaked audio. How do you feel about that?
Not great.
Not great?
Should he keep his job?
It's time to bring in the power panel. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communications strategist. Here with me in studio, Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Likeness is a former NDP strategist. And Sherelle Evelyn is the managing editor of The Hill Times. Hi, guys. Nice to see you all.
Nice to see you,
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Amanda, I'll start with you on this one. This is day 3 of talking about Anandasangaree. The Prime Minister is sticking by his minister for the time being. Do you think that this is a politically viable position? Can he hang on after making comments like that?
Well, I think the Prime Minister does a pretty good job of walking this tightrope. He seems to be able to, to kind of quash the criticism. But this one is tricky. This one is hard to defend because you have a minister who seemingly kind of talked about the fact that there was a problem with the efficacy of the program. Are there enough resources on the ground to execute it? And it's obviously his responsibility when he's about to launch this pilot program to be able to sell it to Canadians. So when you make comments, these comments that were offside, and you get caught doing so, this becomes a problem for the whole government, right? It takes up the airtime. These are the questions that we're asking. It takes away from really selling through this program to Canadians. So I think that, do I think that he should be tossed from his job? I don't. I think he apologized. I think he recognizes what he did wrong. But I really think that this one is a tricky position to have to put both the government and the Prime Minister into.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, the comments are not great the day before you roll out the program, right? He's saying on this tape, I mean, it's quite remarkable. He says, I just don't think municipal police services have the resources to do this, talking about enforcing the ban on some of these assault-style firearms, as the government calls them. He says, if I were starting over, this would be a very different thing. I would be increasing penalties for people who are carrying unlicensed firearms instead. He's talking about his tenant, if he's not happy with the payments that he's getting from the buyback program for his firearm. He says, in your case, what are your losses? You tell me. I'll compensate you, he tells him. So, I mean, this is a doozy, isn't it?
I mean, not since the Gurmont-Grewal tapes in 2004, 2005 with Paul Martin. You're all too young to remember that. If we had tapes in Canadian politics that talk about, things that perhaps shouldn't be. I mean, I hope he's kicking out his tenant, by the way, too. That was a pretty slimy thing to do. But into the politics of it, look, the Conservatives don't really want him gone. They want this story to continue. It's the gift that keeps on giving. This is not the first time Minister Anandasangaree has found himself in hot water from the opposition. There were relationships that he had that raised some concerns before in line with the Tamils and how he was involved or not involved in different pieces of advocacy for a constituent around all of that.
He also wasn't familiar with what an RPAL is, a restricted license for firearms owners, right? And he's in charge of the file, so that was not a great look.
So I think the Prime Minister will probably watch how this plays out over the next number of days, but I think it's a pretty safe bet that I'd even take to FanDuel, JP, that by the time the next cabinet shuffle comes around, that he will not find himself in cabinet.
Jordan?
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think he's long for the portfolio for all the reasons that Tim outlined. But of course, also two issues that he's responsible for, which is an important aspect of crime and public safety and the gun file. These are both absolutely laden with wedge politics for the Conservatives. So it's kind of a gift for them to have somebody who seems to be stepping in it so regularly. And I will give him credit. The minister is out doing his own cleanup on aisle 9.
Yes.
And I think, those interviews are difficult to do for an elected person who's found themselves in this situation, but his answers also aren't great. It's not really acceptable to say that the reason that he stated these things was because it was a private conversation. When you're a minister, you're expected to uphold the government line, regardless of what type of conversation you're in. I think it's also important to note that the timing of this information coming out is likely not accidental. This came from the gun lobby. This is opposition research that they had obtained, and they're releasing at a strategic time. So all of this has some larger forces at play, but unfortunately for the government, this is all a pretty big distraction from a core economic message that they would rather spend the fall focusing on.
Yeah, Sherelle, I mean, you have to give the minister credit. At least he is facing the music. He came on this show and we gave him a bit of a hard time yesterday. He's done other programs. He was in question period. He was speaking to reporters. He was still the front man for this announcement. Like, he's certainly not going into hiding after what was an embarrassing moment. Do you think that that's enough to help him keep his job?
I mean, maybe it's kind of a bit of a test to see. It's like, okay, you messed up. Can you fix it, or can you get your head back above water and carry out the government's agenda? In previous governments, previous ministers, we've definitely seen people go into hiding or send out a parsec or somebody completely unrelated to the file to answer these questions. So that in itself, of course, is telling, and I think that might be a mark in the pro column for him. But so far, Minister Anandasangaree hasn't been the greatest communicator on certain files, and there are other really important issues that he's going to have to carry for the government if he stays in this role. Around C2, the public safety bill that people are saying have lots of issues with government and law enforcement overreach, and so far he hasn't really been explaining well what the government's intent is or rationalizing why the government says that it needs these what can look like really heavy-handed laws. Some of the things, one of the most common things you hear before any cabinet minister gets turfed is how much confidence, the prime minister has in them. So I'm not putting too much stock into that. So I think right now it's just a bit of a test to see, can he, they had this announcement scheduled. It would potentially look even worse if they booted him, at that very moment right before he was about to do it. So can he ride this out?
They have confidence in you until they don't, right? Like, he's not going to be like, well, I'm not sure, we'll have to think about it. Like, he has to stand behind his minister, right?
Exactly.
But there's another element to this, as we've seen play before. The caucus is going to watch how the prime minister deals with this, because Mark Carney came into politics without a huge, loyal political following. So this also gives him the opportunity to show, all right, you make a mistake, I'll back you to a limit. It's important for him in the management of this. If he fires him right away, that maybe sends the wrong signal to his caucus. He needs to demonstrate in certain occasions that he has their back, but he can make the argument because his colleagues may come to him and, after Thanksgiving and say, Prime Minister, I know you're trying to back him, but look, this seems to be the story that's dominating week after week after week. Something needs to be done. He'd rather have that happen than just turf him right now. And I suspect that's part of the calculation.
Yeah. Amanda?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. That's sort of where I was getting at earlier, was like, he's not easily baited, right? Like, he doesn't seem to be somebody who has a knee-jerk reaction to things that the opposition parties are trying to make bigger or trying to make more scandalous. But all of that has a shelf life. At some point, if the story continues, he's going to have to react in a different way. I think the other thing is, like, this comes down to judgment, right? And as Canadians look south of the border, and I think there's really an erosion of trust in leadership, it's really incumbent upon leaders here too to build that trust with Canadians. And when you make mistakes like this, I think it becomes a problem for the government, because they have to react to it. They have to respond to it day after day, but they also have to test how Canadians are feeling about the policies that they're putting in the window. So if Canadians feel distrust because a minister has said, maybe the efficacy of this program isn't as solid as I had projected it to be, that becomes an issue for the government. And I think in these times, judgment really maybe matters more than ever before.
Jordan, what about the Quebec comment that the minister made? Essentially, when he's pushed by his tenant, why are you going ahead with this program? And he says, well, Quebec, it's a very, very, very different place, and we have to, satisfy the Quebec electorate that voted for us, he tells the tenant. What do you make of that angle? I mean, it does make you a bit cynical about the government's intentions with the program, right? Is it really about tamping down on gun crime, or is it just to appease voters that you need in Quebec?
Yeah, I think he said the quiet part out loud. That's you know, this is part of a long tradition for both the Liberals and the Conservatives of using guns and gun control issues as really cudgels to beat each other up with in different regions of the country. And this is both very effective, and you know, you can think about key moments like thinking back to Erin O'Toole's comments during the French debate in the 2021 campaign that were really important in terms of changing some of the tide around their campaign. You can think back to all kinds of moments where the sensitivity of this file has made some significant political change. I think it's cynical, to be really frank. I think that you know, there are real divisions on this topic across the country, and it's the job of politicians to bridge those divides and make good policy, not to exploit them and really do more politics. And I think what's particularly dangerous for the government about the minister's comments is that he exactly suggests that that's what's going on here. So that is a real detriment for the government.
And there's a reason why Quebec is particularly sensitive to this issue, right? I mean, they had École Polytechnique, they had the Dawson College shooting, the Quebec City Mosque massacre. I was there for that. That wasn't pretty. And in that case, actually, the convicted murderer was an illegal firearms owner. He had a license to possess firearms and still carried out those heinous crimes. Sherelle, I mean, is this salvageable? Because there is a constituency for these programs, as we've been talking about. This is you know, usually a winner for the Liberals. It's usually something they're happy to talk about because they know urban, suburban voters, they're lining up behind policies like this. It has been a tripwire for the Conservatives in the past. Do you think that they can turn things around even though they've had to deal with this mess?
Well, yes and no, because pretty much since the Liberals came in with, you know, really pushing the gun control issue in the last, I'd say 10 years or so, where it's become a little, even more of a live wire than it was before. It has, I mean, the people who are, you said there's a constituency that really believes in these policies, there's also a constituency that really is against it. And it isn't necessarily a one that you would think is necessarily cohesive, or you could say, oh, it's only rural voters, or it's only this. It is kind of spread out across the country, and it has been a bit of a stumbling block for the Liberals and really anybody who's been saddled with having to carry this file. There have been political careers that have basically gone down because of it. So depending on, you know, who it is, how it gets moved forward, there are people who are really otherwise, you know, one-issue voters when it comes to the issue of gun control and especially this buyback program. So it can be a winner in the sense that the Liberals have not, you know, lost since they've started pushing the buyback program, but it is, you know, I think chipping away at their support each and every time they bring it up.
It was interesting, too, that the Conservatives put up an Indigenous MP, one of their Indigenous MPs, to give a statement today in the House before question period to remind the government that this is an issue for Indigenous people, too, right? That is one of the constituencies, some of them, are concerned about this buyback program because they rely on firearms for their subsistence and to feed their families, and that it's not just about urban gun crime, right? That's not the only issue when we're talking about firearms. Amanda, I'll just end on this. Do you think, I had someone write to me last night as we were discussing this issue, and that is that the gun deaths in this country are being, you know, we're not really paying attention to them. We're not paying attention to why this program is coming about in the first place. I mean, there was 4,000 people who died from firearm injuries in a 5-year period up to 2020, 3,100 hospitalizations. A lot of them are related to self-harm. So when the Conservatives say, well, you know, most crime guns, and they're right, most crime guns are illegal firearms coming in from the United States. There's the other side of the coin, right, that there is a lot of people who are injured by firearms, many of them inflicting self-harm on themselves. They might be helped by a policy like this if some of these high-powered assault-style firearms, as the government calls them, are out of circulation. That's being lost in this conversation as we focus so much on Anandasangaree.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the biggest issue when an announcement goes sideways because everyone is distracted by what he did versus what he's saying, or the program that the government is attempting to sell to Canadians for all of the right reasons. And there's a lot of data to back up why this program is so important. But unfortunately, we're not talking about that because of this. And again, that goes back to the judgment. If you're making the wrong call stalls and you distract from the issues, your shelf life is going to be limited because the government is requiring you as the salesperson to be able to take this to Canadians and get them to not only buy in, but get them to feel good about it. Nobody's doing that right now because everybody's distracted by what the opposition is putting in front of them, and for good reason.